The stars had watched Earth for a very long time. For 300 years, the Galactic Concord had sent their ships to observe the small blue planet at the edge of the Milky Way. They watched humans fight their wars. They watched them burn their forests and poison their rivers. They watched them point nuclear weapons at each other and come close to ending their own existence. The alien observers wrote their reports and sent them back to the Concord headquarters. The conclusion was always the same. Humans were violent, stupid, and divided. They were no threat to anyone except themselves. When humanity finally built ships that could travel between stars, the Concord was ready. A delegation of 12 species arrived in Earth's orbit on a bright spring morning. Their ships were beautiful and terrible, each one the size of a small city. The message was clear without words. We are powerful, and you are not. Ambassador Lyrian of the Velith Dominion was chosen to speak for the Concord. He was tall and thin, with silver skin and eyes that held no warmth. His species had been part of the Concord for 50,000 years. To him, humans were like children who had just learned to walk. "We welcome you to the galactic community," Lyrian said to the gathered leaders of Earth. His voice was smooth and pleasant like honey poured over glass. "The Concord offers you protection and guidance. In return, you must accept certain limitations." The terms were simple. Earth would be given protected species status. This meant they could not build military ships that traveled beyond their moon. They could not develop weapons above a certain power level. They could not vote in Concord matters or hold any position of importance. In exchange, the Concord would protect Earth from the dangers of the galaxy. There were many such dangers, Lyrian explained. Pirates, raiders, and conquering empires roamed the stars. Without the Concord's shield, Earth would be destroyed within a generation. The leaders of Earth listened carefully. They asked questions. They debated among themselves. And in the end, they signed the treaty with smiles on their faces. Lyrian returned to his ship, feeling satisfied. Another primitive species had been brought into the fold. Earth would provide resources, entertainment, and perhaps some useful workers in time. The humans seemed grateful for the arrangement, as all primitive species did. What Lyrian did not know was that humanity had been listening to Concord communications for decades. It had started 30 years before first contact, when a radio telescope in South America picked up strange signals from deep space. The signals were not natural. They were conversations between ships, between planets, between species that humanity had never imagined. At first, no one could understand the languages, but humans were patient, and humans were clever. Teams of linguists and mathematicians worked in secret for years. Slowly, they began to decode the alien tongues. They learned about the Concord. They learned about its history, and they learned what protected species really meant. The documents were hidden in the oldest Concord archives, written in languages that most aliens had forgotten. Protected species were not partners or allies. They were property, resources to be used and discarded when no longer needed. In 10,000 years, not a single protected species had ever risen to full membership in the Concord. Most had gone extinct, worked to death in alien mines, or sold as servants to wealthy collectors. Earth's leaders read these documents in a bunker deep beneath the Swiss Alps. They sat in silence for a long time after finishing. "They think we are cattle," said the President of the United States. Her voice was calm, but her hands were shaking. "Yes," said the Prime Minister of China, "and they expect us to walk willingly into the slaughterhouse." The decision was made that night. Humanity would sign the treaty. They would smile and bow and play the role of the grateful primitive. They would build their slow, harmless ships and let alien tourists take pictures of their cities. They would become the perfect protected species. And while the galaxy watched their performance, humanity would prepare for war. The project had no official name. Those who worked on it simply called it the Quiet. Engineers and scientists from every nation were brought to secret facilities hidden around the solar system. They studied every piece of alien technology they could find. They bought it, stole it, or took it apart when no one was looking. The alien technology was advanced, but it was also old. Most Concord species had stopped innovating thousands of years ago. They used the same engines, the same weapons, the same shields that their ancestors had used. Why change something that worked? Humans did not think this way. They looked at alien engines and asked how to make them faster. They looked at alien weapons and asked how to make them stronger. They looked at alien shields and asked how to break them. Within 10 years, human scientists had created technology that surpassed anything the Concorde possessed. Within 20 years, they had begun building ships in secret shipyards carved into asteroids far from prying eyes. The galaxy continued to see what it expected to see. Primitive humans in their primitive ships, grateful for the protection of their betters. Alien tourists visited Earth and took pictures of the strange creatures. Alien merchants sold them outdated technology at high prices. Alien diplomats patted them on the head and told them they were doing very well. And in the darkness between stars, humanity's fleet grew larger every year. Admiral Yuki Tanaka stood on the bridge of the Prometheus, the first human dreadnought. She was 60 years old, with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. Behind her, through the viewport, 300 warships waited in perfect silence. 40 years, she said quietly. 40 years of smiling and bowing and pretending to be weak. Her first officer nodded. The hardest war is the one you fight with patience. Tanaka looked out at her fleet. Each ship was crewed by men and women who had trained their entire lives for this moment. They had never known the touch of sunlight or the smell of Earth's air. They had been born in secret, raised in secret, and they would fight in secret until the day humanity no longer needed to hide. Soon, Tanaka said, very soon, the galaxy will learn the truth about Earth. She turned back to the darkness of space, where her ships waited like wolves in the shadows. And on that day, they will wish they had left us alone. 40 years passed like water through open fingers. On Earth, life continued as the Concorde expected. Cities grew taller. Technology improved slowly, always staying within the limits of the treaty. Humans fought small wars among themselves, argued about politics, and worried about the weather. They seemed happy with their place in the galaxy. Alien tourists came in greater numbers each year. They walked through human cities with translators in their ears and cameras in their hands. They found humans amusing, the way they ate with their mouths, the way they laughed and cried and fell in love, the way they celebrated violence in their entertainment but pretended to hate it in real life. Such a strange species, the tourists would say to each other, so full of contradictions. It is a wonder they survived long enough to reach the stars. The Concorde's patrols swept through the solar system every few months. They scanned Earth's ships and found nothing dangerous. They checked the moon bases and found only mining operations. They looked at humanity and saw exactly what they expected to see, a harmless, primitive species that knew its place. They never thought to look in the spaces between stars. Far from any sun, in the cold darkness where light itself seemed to die, humanity had built its true civilization. Asteroid bases the size of cities floated in the void, invisible to any scanner. Factory ships produced weapons and armor around the clock, their fires hidden behind layers of shielding. Training facilities turned ordinary men and women into soldiers who could fight in any environment, against any enemy. Commander Chen Wei stood in the observation deck of Station 7, watching a group of new recruits run combat drills in zero gravity. They moved like dancers, spinning and firing with perfect precision. Each one had been training since childhood. Each one had been born for this purpose. "The new class is impressive," said his aide, a young woman named Sarah, whose grandfather had helped build the first secret shipyard. They need to be, Chen replied. The reports from our spies are not encouraging. The report spoke of the Kethvari hegemony, an empire that had existed for 10,000 years. The Kethvari were conquerors. They moved through the galaxy like a slow plague, swallowing world after world. Their fleets numbered in the tens of thousands. Their soldiers were grown in factories, programmed for nothing but war and death. For centuries, the Kethvari had stayed in their own region of space. The Concord had treaties with them, agreements that kept the peace through tribute and careful diplomacy. But now the reports said the Kethvari were moving again. Their warlord had grown hungry for new conquests, and the outer colonies of the Concord lay directly in their path. Admiral Tanaka received the intelligence in her quarters aboard the Prometheus. She read it 3 times, then sat in silence for a long hour. Outside her window, the fleet waited in the shadow of a dying star. 300 ships had become 3,000 over the decades. Human engineers had outdone themselves with each new design. The Prometheus itself was a monster of war. 2 kilometers long, armed with weapons that could crack a planet's crust, protected by shields that made Concord technology look like paper. It was the most powerful warship ever built by any species in the known galaxy. And still, Tanaka wondered if it would be enough. She called a meeting of her senior officers. They gathered in the war room, men and women from every nation on Earth. Their uniforms bore no flags, no symbols of old divisions. They were simply human, united by a purpose greater than any country. The Kethvari will reach the outer colonies in 6 months, Tanaka said, displaying a map of the galaxy on the central screen. Once they take those systems, they will have a clear path to the core worlds. The Concord will fall within 2 years. And Earth? Asked Captain Rodriguez, commander of the battleship Fury. Protected species are the first to be sold when a new empire takes over, Tanaka replied. Our people will be slaves within a generation. Our planet will be stripped of resources and left as a dead rock. Silence filled the room. Every officer knew the stakes. They had always known. The Concord will not fight, said Commander Chen, who had traveled from Station 7 for this meeting. They will negotiate. They will offer tribute. They will sacrifice the outer colonies and hope the Kethvari are satisfied. They will not be satisfied, Tanaka said. They never are. The Kethvari do not want tribute. They want everything. She looked around the room at the faces of her officers. These were the finest warriors humanity had ever produced. They had given up normal lives, families, the simple pleasure of walking under an open sky. They had done this because they believed in something greater than themselves. We have 2 choices, Tanaka continued. We can remain hidden. We can watch the Concord fall and hope the Kethvari do not find our hiding places. We might survive another century that way, building in secret, waiting for a better moment. She paused, her eyes growing hard. Or we can reveal ourselves now. We can enter this war and show the galaxy what humanity has become. The risk is enormous. If we fail, our species dies. But if we succeed, Captain Rodriguez finished, we save not just ourselves, but everyone. Every species the Concord failed to protect. Every world the Kethvari would have burned. Tanaka nodded slowly. That is the choice before us. I will not make it alone. One by one, the officers voted. The decision was unanimous. Humanity would fight. The preparations began immediately. Ships that had waited in darkness for decades powered up their engines for the first time. Crews who had trained for wars they never expected to fight received their orders. Messages flew between hidden stations, coordinating the largest military operation in human history. And on Earth, life continued as normal. People went to work. Children went to school. The alien tourists took their pictures and laughed at the funny humans. They had no idea that in 5 months everything would change. Admiral Tanaka stood alone on the bridge of the Prometheus, watching the stars through the viewport. Somewhere out there, the Kethvari were advancing. Somewhere out there, worlds were already burning. "We are coming," she whispered to the darkness. "We are coming, and you will learn to fear us." The stars did not answer. They simply watched, as they had always watched, waiting to see what humanity would do next. The Kethvari came like a dark tide across the stars. 8,000 warships moved in perfect formation, each one a black mountain of metal and death. At their head flew the Eternal Dominion, the flagship of warlord Krethax, a vessel so large it had its own gravity. The warlord himself stood on its bridge, watching through ancient eyes as another civilization prepared to fall before him. He had seen this scene 100 times before. The panic, the desperate negotiations, the final surrender. Every species believed they were special. Every species learned they were wrong. The outer colonies fell in days. The Concord sent diplomats with offers of tribute, and the Kethvari took the tribute and kept advancing. They sent warships to defend key positions, and the Kethvari crushed them like insects beneath a boot. The mighty Concord, rulers of 1,000 worlds, could do nothing but retreat. Ambassador Lyrian watched the reports from his office on the Concord homeworld. Each day brought news of another system lost, another species enslaved, another fleet destroyed. The silver-skinned diplomat had lived for 300 years, but he had never known true fear until now. "What do we do?" asked his aide, a young Velith who had not yet learned to hide his emotions. "We survive," Lyrian said quietly. "We offer whatever they want. We sacrifice whoever we must, and we wait for the storm to pass." "And the protected species? What happens to them?" Lyrian did not answer. They both knew what would happen. When the Kethvari took a civilization, they took everything: resources, technology, and people. Especially people. The slave markets of the hegemony were always hungry for fresh stock. He thought of Earth and its strange, violent inhabitants. They would fetch good prices, at least. Humans were known to be strong and adaptable. They would make useful workers until they were used up. It was a shame, really. Lyrian had grown fond of the creatures in a distant sort of way. 300 light-years away, Admiral Tanaka received the news of the Concord's collapse with a grim face. Her officers gathered around her in the war room, watching the same reports, seeing the same destruction. "It is worse than we predicted," said Commander Chen. "The Kethvari are moving faster than any fleet in recorded history. At this rate, they will reach the core worlds in months, not years." "Then we have no more time to wait," Tanaka said. She turned to her communications officer. "Prepare a transmission on all frequencies, every channel in the galaxy. I want every species to hear what I am about to say." "Admiral," Captain Rodriguez said carefully, "once we do this, there is no going back. Every eye in the galaxy will be on us." Tanaka smiled, and there was something dangerous in that smile. "Good. Let them watch." The transmission was prepared in 1 hour. Engineers checked every system, every relay, every backup. This message would travel across the entire galaxy, reaching every ship, every station, every world with a receiver. Nothing like it had ever been attempted before. When everything was ready, Tanaka stood before the camera. She wore her uniform with its simple insignia, a blue circle representing Earth, surrounded by stars. Her face was calm, but her eyes burned with 40 years of hidden anger. "Begin transmission," she said. Across the galaxy, screens flickered and went dark. Then they lit up again with a single image. A human woman on the bridge of a warship that should not exist. "This is Admiral Yuki Tanaka of the United Earth Defense Fleet." On 1,000 worlds, beings of every shape and color stopped what they were doing and stared. On conquered stations, diplomats dropped their drinks. On Kethvari ships, Warriors paused in their preparations for battle. To the HFY hegemony, you have 48 hours to withdraw from conquered space. Every ship, every soldier, every weapon. If you do not comply, we will remove you by force. Warlord Krethax laughed when he heard this. A sound like grinding stones filled his bridge. Humans? The primitive creatures from the edge of the galaxy? What could they possibly do to the greatest military force in existence? But Tanaka was not finished. To the Galactic Conquered, your assessment of humanity was incomplete. For 40 years you watched us and saw what you expected to see. A weak species, a quiet world. A people grateful for scraps from your table. She paused, and her eyes seemed to look directly at every viewer. You were wrong. Behind her, through the viewport, the stars began to change. Shapes appeared where there had been only darkness. Ships decloaked one by one, then in groups, then in waves, small, fast destroyers, heavy cruisers bristling with weapons, massive carriers launching swarms of fighters, and at the center of it all, dreadnoughts the size of cities, their hulls gleaming with weapons that had never been fired in anger. 3,000 warships hung in the void, and more were appearing every second. Ambassador Lyrian stared at his screen with his mouth open. This was impossible. Earth had no ships. Earth had no weapons. The Concord had made sure of that. They had watched humanity for 40 years and seen nothing. But they had only seen what humanity wanted them to see. To everyone else, Tanaka continued, her voice cold as the space between stars, we suggest you stay out of our way. We did not want this war. We did not seek this fight. But we will not stand by while innocent people are slaughtered. She leaned forward slightly, and her next words would echo through history. The galaxy thought Earth was defenseless. Today, you learn the truth. We were never defenseless. We were waiting, and now the wait is over. The transmission ended. For a long moment, the galaxy was silent. Every being who had watched the message sat frozen, trying to understand what they had just seen. The impossible had become real. The primitive humans had become something else entirely. Then, slowly, the galaxy began to react. The conquered leadership called emergency sessions that dissolved into chaos. Protected species across 100 worlds whispered about what this might mean for them. Scientists scrambled to understand how humanity had hidden such a fleet. Merchants calculated the value of trade deals with this new power. And on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, Warlord Krethax stopped laughing. He looked at the recordings of those human ships, at their strange designs and unknown weapons. He had conquered 100 species in his long life. He had never lost a battle. But looking at those ships, for the first time in 10,000 years, the warlord felt something he did not recognize. It was fear. Warlord Krethax did not withdraw. In 10,000 years of conquest, the HFY hegemony had never retreated from anything. They had burned civilizations older than stars. They had enslaved species that once ruled entire galaxies. The idea of running from humans, weak, soft, primitive humans, was not something the warlord could accept. Destroy them, he commanded. Destroy every ship. Find their hidden bases. Turn their planet to ash. I want nothing left but dust and memory. His admirals obeyed without question. 4,000 warships changed course toward the human fleet. They moved in the ancient formation that had crushed 100 enemies before. A wall of death that could not be stopped, could not be broken. Admiral Tanaka watched them come. Her fleet waited at Varath's gate, a narrow passage between two dead stars. It was a good place for a battle. The HFY would have to come through the gate in waves, unable to use their full numbers at once. They are not retreating, said her tactical officer. No, Tanaka agreed. "I did not expect them to. Pride is a powerful thing, especially in old empires. 4,000 ships. We have half that number." Tanaka smiled. "Numbers are not everything. Today, the Kethvari will learn that lesson." She opened a channel to her entire fleet. 3,000 ships heard her voice at the same moment. "Humanity has waited 40 years for this day. We built our ships in darkness. We trained our warriors in silence. We watched the galaxy and learned its secrets while it thought us harmless. Now the time for waiting is over. Today, we show the universe what we truly are." She paused, looking out at the approaching enemy fleet. "Do not fight for glory. Do not fight for revenge. Fight for every species the Kethvari have enslaved. Fight for every world they have burned. Fight so that no one else has to suffer as they have made others suffer. Today, humanity goes to war. Today, we become what we were always meant to be." She raised her hand. "All ships, attack!" The human fleet moved like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. Ships that should have been too large for quick movement turned and accelerated in perfect unison. Destroyers rushed forward in swarms, weaving through space in patterns too complex for any computer to predict. The great dreadnoughts followed like giants, walking through a storm, their weapons powering up with a light that burned across all frequencies. The Kethvari fired first. Thousands of plasma bolts and missiles filled the space between the fleets, enough firepower to destroy a moon. The attack would have ended any other battle before it truly began. Human shields did not even flicker. "Return fire," Tanaka ordered. Human weapons were unlike anything the galaxy had seen. They did not fire plasma or missiles or any technology the Concord understood. They fired something else. Beams of energy that seemed to pass through shields as if they did not exist, striking directly at the hulls beneath. The first wave of Kethvari ships died in seconds. Hundreds of vessels simply came apart, their armor no protection against weapons that ignored all defense. Explosions filled the void like flowers blooming in fast motion. The Kethvari kept coming. They had numbers, they had rage, they had 10,000 years of victory behind them. It was not enough. Human destroyers moved through the enemy fleet like wolves among sheep. They were faster than anything the Kethvari had ever faced, able to change direction in ways that seemed to break the laws of physics. They struck and vanished, leaving destruction in their wake. When Kethvari fighters launched to intercept them, human point defense systems eliminated them in moments. Thousands of small craft became clouds of debris before they could fire a single shot. Captain Rodriguez led his battleship group into the heart of the enemy formation. Around him, his crews fought with cold precision, each action trained into their bones since childhood. They did not celebrate when enemy ships exploded. They did not hesitate when friends died beside them. They simply fought as they had been born to fight. "Concentrate fire on their command ships," Rodriguez ordered. "Break their coordination." Human weapons carved through Kethvari admirals one by one. Each death threw the enemy fleet into greater confusion. The ancient formations that had won 100 wars began to collapse. On the Prometheus, Admiral Tanaka commanded from the front. Her dreadnought moved through the battle like a force of nature, unstoppable and terrible. Enemy ships that tried to target her were destroyed before they could lock on. Enemy admirals who thought they had found a weakness discovered too late that they had found a trap. The battle raged for 6 hours. When it was over, 4,000 Kethvari ships were nothing but debris floating in the void. The survivors were running, their engines burning at maximum as they fled toward hegemony space. In 10,000 years, this had never happened. The Kethvari had never lost. They had never run. Until today. Admiral Tanaka opened a channel to the Eternal Dominion. Warlord Krethax appeared on her screen, and she saw something in his ancient eyes that gave her satisfaction, fear, raw and real. "Your fleet is broken," she said. "Your ships are destroyed. You have lost." The warlord said nothing. For the first time in his long life, he had no words. "I give you one chance," Tanaka continued. "Take your surviving ships and go home. Tell your people what happened here. Tell them that Earth remembers every world you have burned, every species you have enslaved, every innocent life you have ended." She leaned forward and her voice became harder than steel. "Tell them that if you ever return, if you ever threaten the innocent again, we will follow you back to your homeworld. We will break your fleets, tear down your palaces, and free every slave in your empire. This is not a threat. This is a promise." The warlord stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he gave an order that had never been given in Kethvari history. "All ships, retreat to hegemony space." The transmission ended. Admiral Tanaka stood in the silence that followed, looking out at the debris of the enemy fleet. Around her, her officers were quiet, still processing what they had accomplished. They had won. Against impossible odds, against an enemy that had never known defeat, humanity had won. "Send a message to Earth," Tanaka said finally. "Tell them it is over. Tell them we are coming home." She turned away from the viewport, her eyes tired but bright. "The wolves have hunted. Now it is time to rest." The galaxy was quiet for weeks after the Battle of Verath's Gate. News of the human victory spread faster than light itself. Every species with access to a communication network heard the story. 8,000 Kethvari ships had attacked, and half of them had been destroyed in 6 hours. The greatest military force in the galaxy had been broken by a species everyone thought was primitive and helpless. The reactions varied by world. On the Concord homeworld, the government collapsed within days. Leaders who had failed to protect their people resigned in disgrace. New voices rose to fill the gap. Voices that asked hard questions about how humanity had hidden such power and why the conquered had never seen it coming. In the Kethvari hegemony, the warlord sealed his borders and spoke to no one. The shame of defeat was too great. For 10,000 years, his people had known nothing but victory. Now they knew something else. Now they knew fear. And on 100 protected species worlds, beings of every shape and color watched the recordings of human warships with new eyes. If the humans had hidden their strength so long, what else might they be hiding? What else might be possible? Hope, they called it. For the first time in generations, the weak and forgotten of the galaxy felt something like hope. Earth itself celebrated for 3 days straight. People danced in the streets of every city. Fireworks filled the skies. Children who had grown up knowing nothing of the secret fleet learned for the first time what their species had accomplished in the darkness between stars. Admiral Tanaka did not celebrate with them. She stood alone in a garden outside Geneva, watching the sun set over the mountains, the same sun that humanity had left behind 40 years ago when they began building their weapons in secret. She had forgotten how beautiful it was. "Admiral Tanaka?" She turned to find Ambassador Lyrian approaching. The silver-skinned diplomat looked older than she remembered, his movements slow and uncertain. The confidence he had shown when delivering the protection treaty was gone. "Ambassador," she said, "I wondered when you would come." Lyrian stopped a few meters away, as if afraid to get closer. "I have come to ask questions. The Concord Council demands to know how this happened. How did you hide all of this? Our sensors watched your planet for 40 years. Our spies walked among your people." "We saw nothing." Tanaka looked at him for a long moment before answering. "You saw exactly what you expected to see. A primitive species. A quiet world. You never considered that we might be pretending. But why? Why hide your strength? You could have revealed yourselves years ago. You could have built even more ships, prepared even greater defenses. Because we hoped we would never have to use them." Tanaka turned back to the sunset. "Humans are violent creatures, Ambassador. You were right about that. We have fought wars among ourselves since the beginning of our history. We know what we are capable of when we are angry, when we are afraid." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "We built our fleet because we knew the galaxy would never accept us as equals. We knew that someday someone would try to take what was ours. But we also knew that if we revealed our power too soon, we would become like the Kethvari, feared, hated, and alone." "So you waited," Lyrian said slowly. "We waited, and we watched, and we hoped that we would never need to fight." Tanaka smiled sadly. "When the Kethvari came, we had a choice. We could remain hidden and watch innocent people die, or we could reveal ourselves and save them." "You could have let the Concord fall," Lyrian pointed out. "We treated your people poorly. Many would say we deserved what the Kethvari would have done to us." "Perhaps." Tanaka turned to face him fully. "But there were innocent people in the Concord too. Children who had done nothing wrong. Families who had no part in how your government treated others. We could not let them suffer for the sins of their leaders." She stepped closer to him. And Lyrian found himself unable to look away from her eyes. "The galaxy thought Earth was defenseless because that is what we wanted you to think. But here is the truth, Ambassador. We were not hiding because we were afraid of you." Her voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. "We were hiding because you should have been afraid of us, and now you know why." Lyrian was silent for a long time. Finally, he spoke in a voice that had lost all its diplomatic smoothness. "What happens now?" Tanaka looked back at the sunset. The last light was fading from the sky, and the first stars were becoming visible. "Now things change. The Concord will reform or it will be replaced. The protected species will be given the rights they should have had from the beginning, and humanity will take its place among the powers of the galaxy. Not as servants or subjects, but as equals. And if someone threatens the peace again?" Tanaka smiled, and there was something fierce in that smile. "Then they will learn what the Kethvari learned, that humans protect what is theirs, that we do not forgive those who harm the innocent, and that the galaxy should never, ever assume we are weak." Lyrian nodded slowly. He understood now, in a way he had not understood before. Humans were not like other species. They were something new, something the galaxy had never seen before, and perhaps, just perhaps, they were exactly what the galaxy needed. In the years that followed, historians would mark the Battle of Vareth's Gate as the moment everything changed. Earth became a founding member of the new Galactic Alliance, not as a protected species, but as its most powerful military force. The old order crumbled, and something better rose to take its place. And in the academy halls where young officers trained, a single phrase became their motto. It was carved into stone above every entrance, a reminder of what humanity had become. The galaxy was calm. Then humanity arrived. Admiral Tanaka visited those academies sometimes, in her final years. She would walk among the young cadets and remember the days when humanity had hidden in darkness, building ships and training soldiers for a war they hoped would never come. "Never forget what we are," she would tell them. "We are protectors. We are warriors. We are the ones who stand between the innocent and those who would harm them. The galaxy feared us once, and that fear keeps the peace. But fear is not enough. We must also give them something to believe in." She would look up at the stars, the same stars that had watched humanity since the beginning. We must give them hope. And humanity did.